The funeral procession for Iran's late Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei has started in Tehran. It's ongoing at this point. Millions are on the streets as authorities prepare for crowds that could rival and even surpass the turnout for his predecessor nearly 4 decades ago. After lying in state for 2 days at Tehran's Grand Musalla religious complex, the body of Khamenei and his family members, killed on the first day of the war on the 28th of February, began their journey through the capital, accompanied by massive crowds of mourners. Monday's procession will be followed by similar events in the clerical hub of Qom on Tuesday and in Iraq's holy cities of Najaf and Karbala. On Wednesday, the events will culminate in Khamenei's burial in his hometown of Mashhad in northeastern Iran on Thursday. Now, the funerals are a chance for Iran's authorities to project resilience after 5 weeks of war with Israel and the US. They are also eager to tout the mass mobilization in support of the regime following the mass protests in January. Khamenei's successor, his son Mojtaba Khamenei, has not appeared in public since taking power. However, his 3 brothers, Iran's other leaders, presented a unified and a united front at the late Supreme Leader's funeral. From civilian leaders to military commanders, all the major figures of Iranian government were present at the site. Iran's Parliament Speaker Mohammad Baghir Ghalibaf, IRGC Commander Ahmad Vahidi, Quds Force Chief Ismail Qani, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, President Masoud Pezeshkian, and the Chief Justice Ghulam Hossein Mohseni. They paid their final tributes to the late Supreme Leader. The leadership of Iran's so-called axis of resistance also paid their tributes to Ali Khamenei, and these include Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, Houthis. Iran also used the opportunity to show that it remains part of the global community. Countries like Russia, China, Turkey and India have all sent delegations. Even regional rivals like Saudi Arabia attended the funeral. Now, the support for the late Supreme Leader has stunned US President Donald Trump. Trump said that he was surprised to see Iranians crying at the funeral of Ali Khamenei, admitting he believed that the people hated him. Him being the Supreme Leader, the late Supreme Leader. Trump further remarked, and I quote Trump here, maybe they were fake tears. When Israel and the US launched the attack that killed Khamenei on the 28th of February, they appealed to the Iranian public to rise up against the regime and take the reins of their government. No mass uprising took place during the war, but more than 4 months later, millions have now taken to the streets to mourn their leader instead. All right, joining me live on the broadcast are Burzine Wagmar, Center for Iranian Studies, SOAS, University of London. Burzine joins us from London, and Scott Lucas, Professor of International Politics, Clinton Institute, University College, Dublin. Professor Lucas, Burzine, both of you all, thank you so much for joining me here on the broadcast. Let me start with Scott Lucas. Scott, do you feel the Khamenei killing backfired? Is it very much or not at all in line with what US had foreseen on the 28th of February?
Well, I think one can reasonably say that Donald Trump and the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu may have saved the Iranian regime. It was only in January that we saw mass gatherings of Iranians not to praise the regime, but to protest against it because of economic conditions, because of ongoing political issues that go all the way back to the millions that came out and protested after the disputed 2009 presidential election. But what happened is that the Israelis told the Americans, who had been in talks with the Iranians all the way up to February 26th, if we attack, if we assassinate the leadership, because it was not just the Supreme Leader that was killed, it was dozens of Iranian officials and commanders, then the Iranian people will rise up. They will rise up and complete the job. The Israelis even proposing to arm Iranians, Iranian Kurds who are in Iraq, and send them across the border. Now, that plan, of course, has failed. The regime did not surrender. It replaced the leaders who were killed, but more importantly, it put Iranians in the position, and I say this as someone who has quite a few friends in Iran and having worked and taught there, Iranians who do want reform or even want the replacement of the regime, but to come out against the regime during the war by the US and Israel, the regime would say, you're acting for Washington, you're acting for the Israelis, and you're acting for these countries who attack the Iranian nation. And that puts the Iranian opposition, I think, in an impossible position while this war continues.
All right, Scott, stay with us. Burzine, let me come over to you. Do you feel Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump, in fact, saved the Iranian regime, let alone regime change?
Regardless of Khamenei dying in harness, naturally, due to the cancer remission, or through the attacks on the morning of 28th February, we had in Iranian studies already prognosticated that the Third Republic, when it would usher in, would lead to a military securitized oligarchy taking the helms and the clerics being shunted into the background. So whether Khamenei went violently as he did, or would have gone naturally, this would have played itself out. The question is, the regime has honed its skills successfully over the decades in decimating its own population. So it's not new that there was no opposition, and there isn't none currently, even as these contrived, choreographed Shia histrionics are being played out. Remember, it's not millions who've turned out. It's only tens of thousands in a metropolis of 16 million. Point number one. Point number two, the claim that it's the funeral of the century rings hollow. And it certainly won't surpass that of Khamenei, who was a larger-than-life figure when the First Republic ended and his funeral took place on the 11th of June, 1989, where a sixth of the Iranian population did admittedly turn up, and that was a record of sorts. It would not be matched for Khamenei, who was intellectually and theologically a lightweight, and obviously didn't have the charisma of Khamenei. But what is also poignant to remember is that the final internment will take place in Mashhad on Thursday, which marks the 18th Tir uprising, the July 99 uprising, which was the first major flashpoint against the regime. The student riots, varsity riots that had broken out and which were brutally suppressed. And it's from that period of July 99 that we've had these cycles of protests. And as I iterate, at every instance, the regime has successfully clamped down and murdered its own population without compunction and shut them down and continues strengthening itself because of the way the regime has been set up successfully over the decades.
Burzine, you draw the case that this was going to play out regardless. We understand Khamenei was well into his 80s, but I mean, US and Israel, they've taken claim for the assassination, and it was their intelligence, and in one of our previous discussions, it was their intelligence success for the US that the fact that they were able to identify and kill and assassinate the Iranian supreme leader in his house. That was one of their biggest chips, or perhaps the only one, during the course of this war. Debatable, definitely. I'll come back to you for an opinion. But before I go over to Scott Lucas, Scott, all that we've seen in these visuals, those emotions, does any of it look choreographed? Because you see those visuals from end to end. People
the regime will have encouraged this mass turnouts, and of course, and they will have organized this. They will have arranged for transportation for people to come, and of course, state media will highlight the clips that you say. But I think there's a risk here that we say that it's entirely manufactured. I mean, the regime does have supporters. It does have quite a few supporters in a country which I think is almost 90 million people. And those are genuine emotions amongst some of those people who are there. In fact, many of them. Because remember, you don't necessarily have to be a supporter of the supreme leader of the regime to see this as an attack on your Iran, on your country. Because it's not just the supreme leader and officials and commanders who have been killed. You're talking about thousands of Iranians who have been killed, even before the ceasefire. So there is a question where if we can get a lasting ceasefire, what the future of Iran will be. Now, as Burzine points out, the military have a role in that. So will the Supreme Leader's Office. So will other institutions like the Guardian Council, the Assembly of Experts, and indeed even the government will. And so will the Iranian people. But to say that the Iranian people will go one way or the other, support the regime or against it, it's far too simplistic. I think my starting point is just simply, look, there are serious economic and political issues in Iran apart from that U.S.-Israeli war, which has magnified them. Those issues will recur, and the important thing here is to continue to support Iranian people, to have an economic way forward, and I think even more importantly, a political way forward based on rights and justice. Because one reminder that I think has been missed this week, the leader of the Green movement, the man who may have led in the first round of the 2009 presidential election, Mir Hossein Mousavi, has been under house arrest for more than 15 years. If this was a confident regime, even though it has its supporters, why is he still not free to move in Iran? Why are many other political prisoners not free to move in Iran?
All right, I get a sense of a convergence there. I get that point. Let me just quickly also get a certain sense from Burzine. I'll come to you with that first. Do you find Iran more emboldened ever since this war started, given the way they have fired at commercial vessels in the Strait of Hormuz, the way they have fired at West Asia bases of the US, the way they have fired towards the Gulf nations, the way they have also, and most recently, the Iranian Mahan air flight successfully landed in Houthi-controlled Sana'a, breaching that 11-year Saudi-imposed air blockade. That's happened just very recently. In more fronts than one, several fronts in fact, you're finding Iran really going ahead and changing the status quo, including firing towards Israel when Israel attacked Lebanon and firing first. Over to you, Burzine.
It is an apocalyptic regime. It is messianic-minded, and the defiance has been in the very warp and weft of the regime. It is much more so than in previous occasions, admittedly so. Understood. And I also concur, yes, that in a population of 92 million, a good 20 to 25% of the populace are loyalists, no question about it, because they have benefited from the regime and the corruption and venality in place and through sinecures. So it's not to say that the entire population is dead set against the current dispensation. And it's important that Scott mentioned about Green Movement in 2009, because again, there is the fallacy in the West that it was completely a sham election, because there were those who did vote for Ahmadinejad in too. We must remember that, despite the fact that it was a farcical election. And Mousavi now still continues being under house arrest, and the rest of it is only known too well. So yes, there is a base of support. But the point is this. This spate of riots that we saw, the socioeconomic bread and butter ones from December 2025, saw all 31 provinces rocked by dissatisfaction, including those who were working and middle-class Shia loyalists, pious Muslims who hitherto did not join previous riots and outbursts like the July 99 varsity ones, or the other Gen Z ones, which are for basic modicum of social liberties and measures. This was purely driven by bread and butter issues. So they lost some of their own base of the Bazaris and others in from December 2025. That needs to be pointed out. And in June 2025, during the 12-day war, the regime could rally people by hypocritical claims to the Sasanian Empire and pre-Islamic nationalism, and Shapur and Valerian busts being put out on Tehran's streets. This time, they could not necessarily tap into that sentiment. The nationalist sentiment was evident in June 2025. It was not evident just now. Well, partly because people are clamped down and they can't come out, except those who were coming out for lawless protests, as we noticed during the war months. And also because whatever little there was left of that nationalist sentiment evaporated after December 2025 with the murders and killings of population, with people going to, trying to find cadavers of their relations in refrigerated trucks in the month of January and February. So that aspect also needs to be brought.
Burzine, allow me to come in. Burzine, allow me to come in there. When you look at these visuals that we're seeing right now, and also let's not forget the fact that Iran, whether it comes to their own people, they were willing to form human chains around their power facilities when Donald Trump had threatened to go after power facilities. And this was just hours or just about 1 or 2 days before that ceasefire was finally announced. The number of suicide volunteers who were ready to give up their lives, and that included the Iranian president, that was somewhere in the 30 million figure, if I remember that correctly as well. Now, that gives you a sense that they are willing to draw a line beyond which they will not take any foreign country coming in and devastating their infrastructure. Iran has taken a bad amount of damage. There's no denying that. But the population very much stands with their government, or with the clerical government which is there in place. Scott, I'll come to you for a final statement here. At this point, do you feel Ali Khamenei's funeral, it's been a turning point for the entire region, given the number of countries that have also sent in their delegations? That includes Turkey, that includes Qatar as well. Qatar took a large amount of attacks from Iran during the course of the war as well?
No, I think of this more as a kaleidoscope where pieces are shifting, but not necessarily a turning point. For example, there will be some Gulf states who have been very disillusioned with the U.S., with the Trump folks, for not only going into this war, but then not finishing the job. And I'm thinking of Saudi Arabia, I'm thinking of Qatar. They are likely to move or consider moving away from the United States, not to ally with Iran, but to maneuver with Iran. Consider Oman, which is considering its own position, whether it will join Iran in a management system for the Strait of Hormuz. Consider the UAE, which is actually moving closer to the Trump camp and Israel. But then also think about the other countries who are there, such as Turkey. Turkey, which wants to project this role across the Middle East, across the region, how it's going to try to use this for its own interest. What I would say here is it's too simple to say countries will ally with the United States or with Iran. They're going to assess where their interests are. But I think what we can say safely is this. This is a weakened Iran. Despite the fact it wants to project it has this power, it has taken a lot of damage, but it's also a weakened United States because it has largely failed in its objectives. And it's in Israel, which is returning to the idea of a greater Israel with respect to Lebanon and Gaza and Syria. That means this story is not over. This is not a turning point. There are chapters still to come.
Story is not over. We'll leave it there for now. Scott Lucas, Burzine Wagmar, both of you all, thank you so much for having this debate with me. Hopefully it would inform our viewers to draw their own conclusions. Thank you so much for joining me here.
Thank you.